right. Good afternoon and welcome back to another Bookum Nook show. My name is Kyle Colley, and this is a special episode of Authors Talk Podcast, a podcast about hearing the behind the scenes stories, visions, and ideas of writers and on their journey. Today, we are doing something a little different. We're doing something we like to call craft sessions, where we get to talk to different authors, self published authors in this sense, that show their world and how they think about writing. So, I'm so happy to introduce you all to Taylor Duran. He's from San Antonio, Texas, and he's the author of Kayla Find Me. Taylor, welcome to the Authors Talk podcast.
Thank you. It's incredibly humbling to be here.
Yeah, and I really do appreciate you just like allowing us to test this new theme. I think it'd be really helpful for us to talk to authors from different parts of the world and get into more of the craftsmanship of it. So I want to talk to you a little bit like what are some of the key strategies for creating a believable and immersive world in your stories?
Ooh, something that's relatable, something that, well, first you got to be descriptive in a way that helps people see it. Imagine it, because for me, when I read, it's not like I'm reading; it's actually that I'm watching something in my head. And you gotta. So the novels that I've been thinking about have been something that I kind of fell into, but I've also been a deep thinker, fantasy thinker. So while I'm developing the first part of the story, I'm also during times when I'm down or not writing, I'm thinking about how to expand the world, right? To build it. So it doesn't just come all at once, but what I'm learning is that for me, as I'm writing, ideas tend to flow more than when I'm not writing, if that makes sense. Not when I'm in the process of typing out things, I'll have things pop into my head that are beneficial to the story and that add depth, right? So part of what I'm trying to do and the process is that I'm always thinking about double meanings and how it can relate to one thing but also allude to another. That's the psychology of me writing. But building a world, I started off very generic. So I don't like the only place that I mention in like a physical location inside the first novel is Argentina,
Wow.
because I know that, by creating a world where you can be anywhere, right? Like people from Chicago or Denver or LA can see themselves being that character. And I think that's the most important thing is that
Yeah.
you can root for the character, but you can also identify with the character on my series because it's heavily centered around my mental health journey as well.
Oh, very nice. And that's what I was asking too when it comes to that world building, right? Because I think so often we think of those Marvel worlds or Luke Skywalker and the big worlds they do. But I think when it comes to world building, it helps also to just tell those like real human stories, no matter what place we're in, right? So like, how do you kind of do? How do you balance that, like that, bringing real human ethics stories to these, these, giant different maps and worlds that we build?
Well, I think I take a lot of well, my main character is essentially me, right? Going through this process of healing and dealing with the internal emotions that I've been dealing with, right? So I think relating having a character that you can relate to that you can become throughout the entire story. So, one of the things that I like is that a lot of people have told me is that they become my main character. They don't just watch her go through it. They actually see themselves in her. Right? So I think being relatable is how you help identify with the character and create a relatable character within this massive story, right? So, for example, you can have pocket dimensions like I do. You can have, another planet, but it creating that tie to that place to the character and then the character's emotions, and you tie it to the reader.
Yeah, last thing on world building, how do you ensure like the rules of the world are consistent throughout the narrative? Like you said, when you're going to pocket dimensions and everything as well.
So that's interesting because you have to there's a line you have to toe between reality, because I heard this thing, it said reality doesn't make sense, but fantasy does. Meaning that, like, in fantasy, you can make up your own rules, but you have to clearly define those rules and then also catalog or document those rules um for that specific place or the universe. So I've got a list of powers that Kayla will uncover as she goes, and um it's I have a list of the whole, like, 26 powers that she's gonna uncover eventually by the end of the novel series, and sticking to that, right? And then so for me, like, each time she takes a step forward, right, regardless of how many steps back in her journey, she unlocks that power, right? So I have to put what unlocks that power next to that power, right? So, for example, if she, like, in order to use magic, I'll give you like a little snippet behind the first, or like something that nobody really knows. In order to use magic, she has to find her sense of wonder for the world again. And once she does that, then and only then can she start using that magic and stuff. So it really just depends on how you define the rules and how well you catalog and document what those rules are. Um, for example, another example is so she is half angel, half human. So she can travel between the different planes, heaven, hell, and earthly plane. So defining a rule for hell, right? So I think that I've defined the rule as, like, if you get sent to hell, it's not like it's not a permanent thing. It's going to be a thing that you can have the opportunity to get out of, but you have to be forgiven by those you've wronged before they die, right? After they die, then it's like you're stuck. But there is an opportunity but that's for the chance to go to heaven, right? So you have to forgive yourself, but you also have to be forgiven by the people that you've wronged in order to get that doorway to open.
Gotcha. And did you have any challenges, like defining that the world when building this? Kayla finds me, or how did you overcome some of the challenges while building the world?
So a lot of the challenges is I don't know exactly where she is. I know it's on Earth. I know it's in the United States, but putting putting a definitive place in it at the beginning, I never did. Right? She's overlooking a hilltop at the beginning, and she's looking down at a city, but that city could be anywhere, right? So I haven't really defined where in the US she is, because I wanted to leave it open for any ideas that came after.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I want to get into now, like the idea of like developing a series, right? Like, what are some of the important factors to consider when planning a book series and giving yourself, like you said, that flexibility to expand into new worlds?
So you have to have an ending, right? So you have to know how it ends before you can really begin. Because it's like driving, right? Driving from point A to point B. If you don't know where you're going, you're going to be driving all day. And there's going to be no linear path to get there, or there's going to be no defined path to get there. So I think coming up with a main antagonist, right? And having a conflict that ends the series, or has the possibility to end the series, is the most important thing, is having an ending for me, in my opinion.
No, I agree with that. Even like in film writing, they talk about you have to tell full stories no matter what. Even if you're going to do multiple series, it's like the you that one, because you most of the time, you in books it's a little different because you can self-publish, but like in movies, you may not get that sequel. So you got to put all the best stuff in that first book, finish it. First movie, finish it strong, tell a cohesive story, so then you may get that second chance. But I guess in book writing, you have a little bit more flexibility, but it's still the truth where us as readers want to see, we want to see a full story. We want to appreciate it. We want to hear it all the way to the end. So now I think what you're saying makes a lot of sense.
Absolutely. And that's one of the things that I'm having trouble with is condensing a story, because each book is going to be its own story, right? That alludes to the next and continues on to the next, but it's going to have a main antagonist for the entire plot line for the entire series, but each individual book is going to have its own antagonist for that book.
Yeah. And then
So,
okay, my fault. Go ahead.
no, you're good. So one of the things that I'm having trouble with is I know Laura, right? Laura Malin.
Yeah, of course.
Well, she's helping me sell my TV rights, right? So condensing it to one series, right? One season is one of the hardest things because I have so many plot lines. Like my plot lines are going to be more like a diamond shape, right? So it's going to start out like with one point, and then it's going to expand with all of this depth, right? But then it's going to come back to a single point in conclusion. That's the way I look at it.
So did
Go ahead.
I was gonna just to add on that. Did you write the book as if you wanted to make it a movie, or are you just in retro?
Yes.
Okay.
No, I wrote it so that I could actually make it into a movie and get most of the details the way that I wanted it or that I saw it.
So what made you start with a book first versus just doing a script for this?
So I voluntarily checked myself into a behavioral health facility,
Okay,
and that's where this book was born.
gotcha.
So we were doing this exercise of, letting your mind go wander wherever it was. Don't force it to go in a direction and just like imagine. And so I looked around at all the people that felt, as broken, bruised, and beaten as I did, and I just kind of came up with this story to help people. And so I didn't really think of script as heavily as I'm sure other people did, but creating that just getting it out there was the most important thing,
Yeah,
right? So
yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And then like while you're discussing and you're approaching this story, like how do you think about the arcs that span across the book? I know you're trying to. I know at one. I know at one part you're looking at this first book and just saying, okay, how can I turn it into a movie? But on the second one, you're saying, how can I continue this book, right? So how do you kind of expand your standalone novels into a series?
so that ties into the main antagonist, right? The main antagonist is basically indirectly and directly creating her own villains, right?
Gotcha.
So the main antagonist did something that altered her course of life, that changed it from a happy life into a trauma-filled one. So that action that this individual did is such a traumatic event. Like it's such a motivating event for her to become all that she's going to be in order to defeat him, right? So it's about vengeance as well and forgiveness, right? So that's what I mean by having an antagonist that will last the entire series, but also creating enough context to put a standalone novel, but it's better as a series. So I guess it boils down to the antagonist, how strong of a connection you can make between the antagonist and the protagonist, if that makes sense.
Now it makes sense. And then also to just get a little bit deeper into the antagonist, how do you write compelling antagonists that people maybe not even root for, but at least believe their narrative or their because sometimes you watch a movie and you're just like this person is just a villain, right? Like I have nothing for them. But sometimes you watch a movie and you like I kind of agree with them. How do you kind of balance that in that sense?
So I don't think that's this type of novel though.
Yeah,
So balancing that, so have you seen Game of Thrones?
I've seen I've seen episodes of Game of Thrones. I haven't seen all.
Okay, so you know that everybody hates Joffrey,
Yeah.
right? Everybody hates Joffrey because he's an evil, vindictive person. In my opinion, the most powerful type of character antagonist that you can have is one that people strongly hate, right? That feel emotions strongly to the point where it balances the hope and the rooting for the main character, the protagonist, right? So that's the most important thing, is creating a villain for me in this series that creates that strong, exponentially, like, just powerful negative emotion towards them, like to hate them. But it's also about, the hero is supposed to be better than the average person, right? So more forgiving, more, taking the honorable route instead of doing what they want based on impulses, what's right versus what's easy. So then you got to make a choice of, are you going to make an anti-hero, or are you going to make a hero that is going to inspire those by essentially doing the right thing morally. So that's kind of where I'm at.
No,
So creating a identifiable villain is not something that I'm trying to do.
yeah, I get that too. And I agree with you in that sense because it seems like a lot of times when you watch shows of the villain, you just truly. My thing is that though it seems like the villains that you truly hate stick around the longest too. You know, a lot of times in shows, like they just get somehow they make it to the next season. Like you thought they were dead, they survived. You know, so then you really do grow that hate over time and over books. So is that kind of how you planted it in your story as well?
Yes. So I planted it to where this person did something so egregious to my main character that you don't think that there's any way that she will ever do morally right by what she does, what she should, right? So that is going to be the tricky part, is having her do what's morally right, but also, trying to move and maneuver in that direction.
Yeah. What common mistakes do you see like while developing series and like how can you help? You know, how would you tell authors to kind of avoid some of these steps if you're trying to build a series of books?
I would say plan, write an outline, because the first one I just did stream of consciousness and you can really tell. So whatever popped into my mind, that's what I wrote. And I kind of screwed myself over on some of it because without lack of planning and without lack of forethought, I threw some things in. I threw one thing in that I don't know how I'm going to tie into the story just yet. So that is my mistake. And it's it's going to be hard for me to do that without planning, without heavily thinking on this thing, because it doesn't tie to the storyline at all. So my advice would be to plan thoroughly. And so one of the things that I do is I ask questions and I get people's feedback, like families' feedback after they read it, and I ask them to eviscerate me with questions, right? So like if I say something like enlightenment, right? So it's in the title. I want people to ask, what is enlightenment? How do you achieve it? Like, can anybody achieve it? There's like X, Y, and Z, all these questions so that I can answer those plot holes. So my method of writing is I shotgun plot holes all over the place and then I answer them a little bit later. But I continue to do it so it leaves questions that I want to answer later on, which adds intrigue, which adds, curiosity and just it kind of not manipulates, but it puts the reader in a position where it's frustrating, but in a good way.
Gotcha. And speaking of enlightenment, what does the hero's journey look like in your story? And then how do you continue the hero's journey in different ways throughout the series?
So the hero's journey throughout the series is she's going to become mentally healthy. That's her path to
Mm,
enlightenment, right? So it's all about her growing as a person, and that's how she progresses. That's how she gets stronger. That's how she gets to her maximum potential, which is limitless, right? So that, and then also each individual arc, each book is going to have her make a realization and conquer those traumatic experiences and responses to those traumatic experiences. But I've already made a decision that by the end of the novel, she's not going to get rid of, and she's not going to be cured of all the traumatic responses, because that's unrealistic. Because as we get to a point where we heal, the responses don't go away, we manage them better. And I think that is the key to creating a believable, real character. And part of reading a book and part of watching a TV series, which a lot of people have a problem with doing, right, in my opinion, is that they don't suspend their disbelief, right? So when you're watching or reading a book, it's easier when you're reading a book because it's a lot more in detail and explained. But when you suspend your disbelief, you take what you believe to be true and you just let it go, and you immerse yourself into the laws of nature in this world that you're watching, and you believe it because that's how it was written, right? So other than that, like I feel like a lot of people, like with the Fast and Furious series, they went to space or something in a car, and that, to me, like when I watch a movie, I simply just watch to enjoy it. But people are like, well, how do they, like, movies are and books are for entertainment and lessons and learning. And if you're going to constantly question their laws of physics and gravity, then what's the point of watching it, in my opinion?
Yeah, I think for us as readers, I think we want to we want to hear a cohesive story. And I remember there was this film writer. He said like the key to storytelling is telling lies with no holes in them. So like we're okay with the car going to the moon if it makes sense for why it's going to the moon, right? Or if it has the same integrity throughout the story. But when people just try to throw things into a story and you're just like, wait, why is that happening now? And that doesn't make sense back here. Now your brain, like, you don't want to get taken, like the reason he says tell lies with no holes in it is like when you have a hole in the lie, it takes you out of the storytelling. And now you're sitting there as a reader or as a viewer saying, wait, that doesn't make sense there. What happened there? Are they going to pay off this? At least within a series, you can let things go away because you're like, all right, it might come back in book 2. It might come back in book 3. But when it comes to, like, we're kind of talking about finishing stories in that first one so you can see it, I think readers struggle with the idea of like, why did this happen and how did it not get solved, or why, what's going on. I think that's where the reader and the viewer gets taken out of stories.
Right. And the reason why I'm asking all these questions, or having people ask me all these questions based on reading it, being to go back 20 years and answer questions, right? 20 years later, I don't want to be sitting there like making stuff up because I couldn't I couldn't have the forethought to think that far ahead, right? I want to tie up everything in little bows so that way it's a complete, well thought out story. And that's my main daunting task too.
Perfect. Well, Taylor, thank you so much for being a part of this craft session. I wanted to, like I said, dive into different conversations where we get into the art of writing and get into the author's minds and talk about story on a deeper level, so that when someone listens to this podcast and they're trying to figure out how to get into world building or develop a series and how to keep a story intact, they get inspiration from authors like you who are in the trenches. So, just give us like your best, like maybe 3 tips as a writer, or anything that you think would be helpful for an author listening.
So planning, this is probably number one. Outline. Um, you know, it's okay to put things in and take them out. It's okay to just come up with ideas and write them down, but don't put them in the story. And then just a lot of documentation, a lot of, character sheets, place setting sheets. Just make sure that you're documenting everything so that you're consistent. And that's one of the things that I didn't do for the first novel, so I have to go back and do that.
No, I love
So
it. I love that. I think being your own I don't use the word critic, but being your own person that, like, checks on yourself and improves yourself and allows you to be a stronger writer. I think that's really important. So I think we all, anytime we look back on some of our old work, we're still like, hey, there's a lot to improve, and I think that's a good thing as an artist. So thank you so much again, Taylor. Check out Taylor's book. Make sure we support him and also connect with him on social media. Let us know where we can find you, where we can get the book and everything.
yeah, absolutely. Amazon and at official Taylor Duran at official Taylor Duran on Instagram.
Perfect. All right. Well, thank you for your time. We truly do appreciate you.
Thank you.